Hello again everyone, and welcome back to a very long overdue Intel update from the S2 Underground. Before we begin, I just wanted to apologize for the slowdown in video production lately. We've had a series of unfortunate events happen in rapid succession, preventing me from getting Intel updates out. Firstly, and most importantly, one of our team members here has been a bit under the weather lately, and the entire staff here has been working basically around the clock 24/7 for the past week or so, taking care of him. And besides that, we've also been working on other projects as well, which we have really been pouring our hearts and souls into, which will not see the light of day for quite some time because of research and development. Another reason we haven't dropped an Intel update in a while is because of me. I'm really the only one who works on these Intel update briefs, and by now I don't really know what to say. But since so many of you depend on these briefs for more than just their Intel value, I wanted to make a brief telling you that I don't know what to say. The world is a crazy place right now, and it's only getting crazier by the second. And I can't think of many ways of talking about the issues we face without sounding like a broken record. We're in that weird situation yet again where there's a lot going on, but only so many ways to talk about it and only so many new solutions that we can come up with. So today we're going to take a higher, more strategic approach, and I can at least show you some of where my own concerns lie, at least over the immediate future, and what I and the rest of the team here are doing moving forward. As many of you who have been following us for a while already know, there is an unfortunate phenomenon that occurs with pretty much everything we do, which has become a sort of inside joke among the team here. And that is that the harder we work on something, the more unpopular it usually is. And at this point, it's pretty much a guarantee that the more important we think something is, the more underwhelmed the masses of people on YouTube will be. And that's fine. That's probably a good thing, to be honest. We're obviously not here for the masses. We have always intentionally targeted a very small minority with our content anyway. So with that out of the way, let's get going with the classic quantity over quality shorter length brief, and I'll put my personal gripes aside for another day. And let's begin with logistics. Like I mentioned, I'm going to try to keep this at a more strategic level, mostly because I have no idea where shortages are located at this point. Let's face it, our ability to track shortages was never really that good or accurate anyway, but right now, if it takes me 2 hours to verify with an 80% confidence level that a single tweet is true, that's not really a valuable use of my or anybody else's time. Instead, I'm going to focus on 3 main areas of concern that could get pretty spicy over the summer. And those 3 areas are food, energy, and economics. Let's talk food first. Ukraine being the breadbasket of Europe leads to a few more immediate problems, like a shortage of grain. Now again, we must take everything with a grain of, well, grain I guess, because for everything that I'm about to say, one could easily say it's not that simple. This applies to everything we brief, but especially the grain situation in Europe. So keep that in mind, is that this may be a simple explanation, but it's a lot more complex than that. Right now, the Ukrainian war is going to have somewhat of an unknown impact on the growing season. Some people in the agricultural community say it's not going to have any impact at all. Some people are saying that it's going to be a lot more significant than we think. Whatever the case is, Ukraine provides roughly 11 to 15% of the world's grain. And both Russia and Ukraine together provide around 30% of the world's wheat specifically, and of that, Ukraine provides about 8%. Now, take those numbers carefully, again, because I have never found a statistic as hard to verify as that one is. Like, honestly, that's one thing that you'd think would be easily verifiable, but the freaking media is at it again, and I can't even find out with any reliability how much grain Ukraine exports annually. Mainstream media sources and even scholarly journal articles are openly lying about how much grain Ukraine and Russia export, because the mainstream media wants to push a narrative. They want to push war, and the idea that the Ukrainian war, the war that the media supports, is causing food shortages in Europe goes against their narrative. It sort of removes a lot of the justification the media have pushed forward, justifying the war in Ukraine. But anyway, you've got to operate with some data, right? And since I can literally make up whatever statistics I want, let's not use any number at all and break this down Barney style. Ukraine exports wheat. Russia exports wheat. Both countries together export a lot of wheat. And that wheat goes to the rest of Europe. Russia has been exporting 0% of their wheat for months. They stopped all exports of wheat months ago in preparation for this invasion. 100% of Ukraine's ports are currently blockaded by the Russian Navy. 98% of Ukraine's grain is exported via these ports. So using this data, we can safely say that the largest exporter of grain, Russia, and the fifth largest exporter of grain, Ukraine, in the world have effectively stopped exporting grain. That has to have some kind of impact, and I can't imagine it's a positive one, at least for Europe. And on top of this, the planting season for grain is in the springtime, right after the spring thaw. Can anyone think of anything that might be going on in Ukraine that might impact agricultural pursuits? Exactly. Obviously, not all agricultural operations will be impacted by the war, but I can't imagine a war being great for sowing seeds. The good news is that the spring planting season is largely negligible in Ukraine. Roughly 95% of Ukraine's wheat is winter wheat, and that was already in the ground when the invasion happened, so I don't really know what the impacts of that could be other than maybe getting it out of the fields when it comes to harvest time, right? Honestly, a bigger agricultural concern for Ukraine at the moment is their barley and corn crop. That could be a big problem if they have trouble getting seeds in the ground this spring, or even later this year. But we see how things start to snowball. You've got a shortage now due to little exports, and you'll have a shortage later in the year because of lack of planting, or whatever those impacts will be. Again, there's no way we could possibly know, right? We can't predict how the war will affect the planting cycle, but it has to affect it some. This will be made worse by fertilizer shortages, which we have been seeing for a long time. Now, for us here in the U.S., any kind of shortage of grain in Ukraine will be negligible, really. We don't really have to worry about shortages of grain so much. After all, the U.S. is a massive producer of wheat and corn as well. This invasion, especially the political actions, is going to impact the global wheat supply for years. Again, what those impacts will be, I don't know. But over the past 2 years, the supply chain for every single thing on Earth has been thrown out of whack, so it would be wise to prepare for global food instability. Another major concern is energy, and those concerns differ based on what continent you're on. For us here in the US, that means what we call POL, or petroleum, oil, and lubricants. Expect anything fossil fuel related to either present vulnerabilities or be impacted by political and economic events over the summer. So what does that mean in plain English? Well, expect gas prices to stay pretty high for the time being. Right now, the feds are trying to keep prices low by tapping into what little remains of our strategic reserves. But our national petroleum stockpile was already at its lowest recorded level months ago, so that's not going to be a safety net for too long. Our strategic oil reserves are just that, strategic oil reserves. I don't think that the regime will tap the reserves completely, but that is a finite resource. All those old salt mines down on the Gulf Coast where our strategic oil reserves are located, they're not an infinite source, right? And with OPEC looking to start accepting yuan in addition to dollars to pay for oil exports, this could be a pretty big problem further down the line. But we'll talk more about the economics of that in just a minute. For our viewers in Europe, the energy concerns are much more pressing than high gas prices. Most European nations are extremely dependent on Russian natural gas, and some countries are cashing the checks that they wrote years ago, such as Germany. Being strategically dependent on solar, wind, and geothermal energy sources for critical infrastructure when your adversaries are still on petroleum? Well, we're finding out just how bad of an idea that was. Germany is the poster child for this. German politicians have constantly, without fail, made the worst possible decisions when it comes to energy production, especially in the industrial sector. Just look at Germany's decisions regarding nuclear power. They are phasing out all of their reactors, even when they know that they have nothing to replace them with that is as reliable. And so, throughout Europe, national-level energy problems are cast down onto the people to deal with. All around the world, but particularly in Europe, we are seeing governments create problems and the citizenry trying to solve those problems. And none of those problems has been so universal as energy. Citizens around the planet are buying up as many generators and fuel cans as they can afford. Same with consumer-grade solar panels. And don't even get me started on what lithium prices look like right now due to people and companies buying it up for building batteries. Throughout Europe, I don't know if there has ever been a time that energy was as unstable as it is right now. So what does all of this mean? Well, there are two conclusions. For one, if you want to have electricity when blackouts occur, you need to create your own off-grid electrical generation methods, whatever that is. It's not as simple as buying a $2,000 solar generator and some solar panels that you fling out in the driveway when those power goes out in your neighborhood. What are you going to do when blackouts or power surges or rolling brownouts become standard operating procedure in your area? Going onto a solar system temporarily is fine to run like some minor appliances, charger devices, things like that, during a temporary emergency. But when the brownouts become routine, a more long-term solar setup would be something worth looking into. Secondly, the same attitude applies with fossil fuels, especially here in the US. Politicians will continue to throttle petroleum fuel sources because that is the one thing that people cannot reproduce in their backyard, and transportation equals freedom. We've talked quite a bit about why our politicians are trying really hard to restrict our freedom of movement here in the US, but at this point it's extremely clear that the current political regime in the US is intentionally using energy as a weapon to control the people. And if you don't agree with that, fine, I don't care. The long story short is that the average American needs to be able to have transportation when the government is fighting with everything they've got to stop you from traveling. What I think about the current political regime doesn't matter. What you think doesn't matter either. What's going to happen is going to happen, and I would fully expect gasoline to be used as a weapon for the foreseeable future. Bottom line is that we citizens and the consumer market need to be figuring out alternative transportation right now. If it's building or buying your own tiny electric car so that you'll at least be able to charge it up with the panels in your backyard, that might be one solution. Buying a motorcycle or a dirt bike which uses much less gas might be an option, and there are a lot of electric dirt bikes out there that are the new hotness these days. Even an e-bike might be an option for some. You don't have to stop showering, start wearing sandals, and use a magic crystal for deodorant just because you invest in some kind of electric transportation. I myself think that electric vehicles are a fashion statement or a status symbol for most people, and will not be replacing serious vehicles anytime soon. However, based on the energy instability that we have already seen, including domestic attacks on our critical infrastructure, I really think it's a good idea to at least have some kind of vehicular backup that can take over some tasks when the petroleum gets hit with a cyber attack or regulations or both. And finally, a massive concern, far more troubling than either food or energy, but also something that is completely out of the hands of citizens, is economics. Specifically, inflation. A lot of people far smarter than us have been talking a lot about inflation for the past year or two, and recently those concerns have become more urgent. In the field of economics, never have there been so many questions asked that no one has a clue how to answer. Are we heading toward a hyperinflation event? What do we do to prepare for it? What would a hyperinflation event look like, considering that most currencies on the planet are pinned to the US dollar? What happens when the world's fiat currency fails, and can that even happen at all? I'm not even going to pretend to have the answer to any of these questions, and even economists that have spent their lives studying this can't really give us that much more advice. We can read history, and that gives us a pretty big advantage in every other problem we face, but it's not as helpful as you'd imagine when trying to figure out how to beat inflation. From the Weimar Republic to Venezuela, the circumstances for those hyperinflation events are just different enough from our own situation to not be particularly helpful. Now, we will at some point throw together an in-depth study on inflation, its causes, and what you can do about it. But, spoiler alert, there's not much that you can do about it. It would be easier to repeal every single firearm law or regulation than it would be to stop the Federal Reserve from printing money. So to me, there are really only a few options that seem viable, and none of them are particularly great. The options are basically to jump ship, converting a fiat currency into precious metals or a different currency that would retain value after a hyperinflation event in one currency. Though again, seeing as the US dollar is the world's fiat currency pretty much, if the US dollar fails, it will bring down most other currencies on the planet with it. at least in theory. Really, the only things that we can do right now is buy as many goods as we possibly can right now, so that when the inflation hikes those prices a year from now, you will have supplies, right? Spending $1 on a can of beans now and storing it for a couple of years when the price of a can of beans is $5 is a good choice. At this point, I myself am not prepping and stockpiling supplies because of shortages necessarily. It's really just to save money in the long run when inflation gets out of control. And let me just give you a personal example. I have noticed, as have most people noticed, that my usual like non-prepping grocery bill per week or every 2 weeks or so has roughly doubled. And you might ask yourself, well, why has it doubled and not just gone up based on the price of inflation? So you'd think that your grocery bill would go up directly in correlation with inflation. Well, here's the thing, it's not, because different companies are increasing their prices based on a few different things. They're usually front loading that cost. Like, for instance, the other day, I think Aldi announced that they were going to increase their prices by like, on some items, by like 50%. And you're saying, whoa, what the hey? Why 50%? Like, inflation's not at 50%. If inflation gets to 50%, we're in a hyperinflation event, and it probably won't matter too much anyway. Um, but so why are they increasing their prices that much? Well, it's because they're front loading that cost. They would rather bite the bullet now and tick off a lot of their customers right now and make that profit so that when inflation gets a lot higher than that, or inflation has already gotten higher and they've been taking losses this entire time, well, increasing their prices is a way to correct that. A lot of companies, what they are doing is either front loading that inflationary cost and assuming that inflation is going to get higher, or they have put off price increases for so long that they're now either taking a loss or they're basically making no net gain for some products. And of course, this varies product to product. And of course, we're only talking about actual price increases. We're not talking about things like shrinkflation or stuff like that. The reason being is a lot of companies, what they have decided to do, like apparently Aldi, is say, all right, customers, we're going to have an inflationary price increase, and there you go. It's going to be, in a couple of days at midnight, all of our goods in this category are going to go up by this amount of percentage. And in actuality, really the thing to do is for companies to adjust their prices based on inflation. As soon as the inflation report comes out, say, all right, we're going to increase our prices of our goods by that amount. But here's the thing, there's a huge disconnect because inflation is a daily changing thing. And usually by the time we have found out that inflation has gone up by X percent, it's already too late. We've already lost that value of our US dollar, right? So a lot of companies end up trying to front load this. They're going to increase their prices by 20%, by 30% to make sure that they only have to do one price increase this quarter and they can take those profits that they make. Like inflation is only at 8%. Well, they increase their prices by 20%. They're going to take that difference in percentage and use that to front load the cost for when inflation does start creeping up. If that makes sense. That's probably a confusing way to think about it, but a lot of companies are front loading this inflation issue. They are increasing their prices by more than what the inflation is so that they can recoup those costs or predict where inflation will go. So when you have that happen in every grocery store in the country with every product in a grocery store, yeah, your grocery bill goes up by way more than just inflation. And I don't think people realize that. Sure, people know, hey, man, I bought the same amount of food as I did last week. My bill is now $20 more, $30 more, $50 more. People notice that, but they don't necessarily notice that it's a lot more than the inflationary percentage, because a lot of people they have a general idea of what they're spending on food. Granted, a lot of people nowadays don't necessarily get most of their nutrition from a grocery store. Most people eat out a lot. So that's even harder to calculate prices because you're paying for the preparation and not just the raw ingredients. But in any case, hopefully that kind of explains why inflation is much more of a problem than you might think, and it's costing you more than inflation. You're not paying just inflationary prices. You're paying for the prices you're paying the price on things for where companies think inflation is going to go. And that's results in a lot higher increase across the board. Again, I want to talk more about inflation, and specifically how individuals can make it through it, and really if individuals in today's world can even make it through a hyperinflation event. I really want to get down and talk a lot more about these details, but I need to do a lot more research. I need to do a lot more reading, and I need to learn a lot more before I can formulate a decent opinion on what to do. So give me some time to think about it. Let the team here chew on it a little bit with me, and we'll figure out something. We'll see what we can do. I know that right now. I know right now, the solutions for an inflation to make it through inflation are not particularly either feasible or really great solutions. So, plus we're in uncharted territory when it comes to what the U.S. dollar means to the world these days. So stay tuned for that, and we'll come back to the inflation issue in a separate video. I guess the biggest concern of all is the combination of what second and third order effects will happen due to the food situation becoming more serious, the energy sector being weaponized even more, and inflation becoming a very serious threat. As we all know by now, events tend to snowball at the worst possible times. So chances are these three concerns will rear their ugly heads in unison and all cascade to cause complications all at once. That I really don't know what to do about. There is no real way to be reliably proactive in determining what problems will pop up, so I guess all we can do is be reactionary and mitigate our damages for whenever something does happen. So there you go, the three biggest concerns that I am most concerned about, well, at least in conjunction with censorship, domestic spying, and the other long-standing issues. But food, energy, and inflation are really the big three things I'm watching carefully and would expect to become big problems over the next few months. So with that mountain of text out of the way, and with this strategic stage set, let's move to critical infrastructure. First up is an issue that probably most people have not heard about at all, and I wanted to talk about it today because it's sort of in the local military news, and that is the Red Hill Bulk Storage Fuel Facility scandal. This has been a massive problem for, I think, about a decade or so. This is probably the worst groundwater contamination event that no one knows about. So here's the short version of what's been going on. During World War II, the government was concerned about above-ground fuel storage being a massive strategic target. Again, Hawaii, small island chain, needs a lot of fuel because it was the headquarters for the Pacific Fleet. You needed a lot of fuel tanks, and having a lot of fuel tanks above ground is not a super great thing if you're getting bombed in a war. And with World War II kicking off, the United States was certainly looking at Hawaii being a vulnerability. So they began construction of a series of massive underground fuel storage tanks under a volcano, which became known as the Red Hill Site. These concerns were confirmed when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor during the construction of the Red Hill storage facility. So the fuel storage facility was justified financially by the feds, and the Navy continued building out the complex, eventually consisting of 20 underground tanks, each capable of storing roughly 12.5 million gallons of fuel. Well, it turns out these suckers were actually built directly over an aquifer and have been leaking fuel into the groundwater for decades, and the Navy, in classic fashion, has been covering it up. Within the Navy, it has been pretty common knowledge that the tap water throughout Pearl smelled and tasted like fuel, but the Navy ignored the problem and concealed several fuel leaks that occurred as far back as the 1990s, until the civilian populace started getting affected, and then this story blew open. As it stands right now, the Hawaii State EPA and the federal EPA have rejected several of the Navy's plans to fix the problems because the plans are not good enough. The Navy has been fumbling this problem for many, many years now. Even after they got caught lying, the Navy doubled down and said that as recently as last November that the water was, quote, safe to drink. But third-party testing immediately confirmed unsafe amounts of fuel in the water. Currently, the U.S. Navy is not in compliance with the environmental orders that have been mandated by the feds or the state of Hawaii. A few months ago, the DoD kind of gave up on salvaging the site and mandated the complete defueling and shutdown of the site. But since the site is so large, it takes a long time to shut it down. The reason that we're talking about this now is that there was yet another fuel spill a couple of weeks ago. This time it wasn't much at all. It was only about 30 gallons of fuel and water mixture. So pretty much negligible compared to the tens of thousands of gallons of fuel that has been spilled over the past few decades. The interesting part about this latest leak is really the reaction to it. Just read any Navy Times or Military Times article and you will immediately realize how those publications are mostly just propaganda tools now. In any case, I just wanted to mention this event because it highlights not just the contamination accidents that can occur, but the decades of cover-ups that often go along with such events. Moving on down to the Saudis. Recently, OPEC has floated the idea of allowing China to pay for oil in yuan. This means a lot of things, and I could probably talk about this for quite a bit of time. But the bottom line is that when the Saudis even remotely consider another currency than the US dollar, this signals their lack of faith in the US dollar. Of course, it's not like the Saudis are expecting the US dollar to fail as the world's fiat currency, but it does signal that they are concerned. And the Saudis are like the Russians, they never take a dump without a plan. So when the Saudis start making moves with regards to the logistics of how to potentially continue their market for fuel in the event the US dollar has some problems, well, that should be concerning. Up next is not something that affects the United States so much at the moment, but it is an infrastructure concern, so I thought I'd mention it. And that is the Russian jamming of GPS signals. Really, this is a problem for a lot of Europe, mostly the countries that border Ukraine, but it is kind of spilling over into other areas. In particular, the French have taken note of this. Their regulatory agency, DGAC, recently announced that Russian GPS jamming that is occurring in the Ukrainian war theater is spilling over into Europe and affecting commercial aviation. Finland has been reporting detecting GPS jamming and spoofing for weeks now, but the problem of commercial aviation being affected seems to be spreading. Due to how radio waves propagate, it makes sense that aircraft would be affected the most. After all, they are way up in the sky and have line of sight for hundreds of miles, making them very vulnerable to GPS jamming, or even spoofing, I guess. In other words, the Russians on the ground might think they are jamming the GPS signals of ground targets within a small area, maybe a few miles, but aircraft hundreds of miles away can, and apparently are, being affected by this. Again, we're going to be talking a lot more about GPS jamming and spoofing in the future because this is the future of warfare, sadly. And the Ukrainian war has illustrated the importance of figuring out alternative ways of navigation without GPS. You can see this in the U.S. government, in the military's bids and attempts to find non-GPS related navigational tools or things for navigation in GPS denied environments. There's a lot of cool technology stuff out there, really fascinating things that you can do. But for the most part, for us on the consumer level, the lesson is learn how to use a map and compass because you can't go wrong with that, right? So moving on to number 4 there, the Biden regime increasing the ethanol levels in fuel. The classic watering down the whiskey approach. So when it comes to the Biden regime increasing the ethanol levels or approving the increase of ethanol levels in fuel in an attempt to bring down gas prices, a lot of people have come to a lot of conclusions or basically just had some wait a minute moments. And one of those classic wait a minute moments is when the Biden regime in one breath says that we're going to have food shortages here in the U.S. But by the way, that corn that we're going to be short on, we're going to use most of it to make gas or make ethanol for gasoline. So a lot of people have brought that up, and I briefly kind of wanted to address that by saying that it's more complicated than that. For one, most agriculture in the United States is contract-based. So at the most, the only thing that I can see this ethanol increase affecting food prices would be if farmers were to write new contracts for the production of ethanol-grade corn so that... And it's an opportunity cost. Basically, farmers switching to ethanol corn rather than sweet corn, which is what you eat. they're two different products, right? So you're not going to have a direct correlation there. The most correlation you might have is, like I mentioned, farmers deciding to switch to ethanol fuel production. Is that going to happen? I highly doubt it, because I have to do the math and kind of figure this out, but I highly doubt that farmers are going to immediately start switching their crops and writing new contracts for, thousands of acres of cornfields, simply because Biden temporarily increases the ethanol in fuel. Farmers are a lot smarter than that. They realize that this is just a stopgap, and then their fields are tied up for a long time based on a temporary issue, and the market price of corn could switch. So I don't know that there will be a whole lot of farmers saying, "Oh, look, Biden just made ethanol lucrative. Let's go switch to ethanol and let's not grow food." I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But you can certainly make the argument, and somebody who makes that argument, I wouldn't say you're wrong. I'm just saying that I don't know. We have clearly seen the Biden regime attempt to get farmers to not grow food, right? Remember, there was reports from months ago. We were talking about how the Biden regime quietly increased a program, or reauthorized a program, or increased the amount of money you get for letting your fields return to nature, right? This whole environmental BS stuff that's done under the guise of a lot of political maneuvers. So again, I don't know if this is going to be a huge impact, but it's probably going to affect it some. I just don't know. I would think that a lot of corn farmers out there are probably going to stick with growing human corn, because again, shortages are probably going to occur in other kinds of staple goods, and corn is a good way to fill those gaps. I don't know though, so I guess we'll have to see. But when it comes to fuel, it's a little bit more clear, just slightly. When it comes to fuel prices, this will probably have a pretty negligible impact. For one, the production of ethanol requires a lot of energy anyway. And since the fuel is basically watered down even more than it already is, you have suffering fuel efficiency. So you basically have fuel, gasoline, that is actually more expensive per mile because it's more inefficient. So you might run into the problem of gasoline costing 20% less. Yeah, sure, thanks, Biden. The cost of gasoline's down 20%. But it's 25% more inefficient, if that makes sense. Now, again, I don't know what the math looks like on this. Adding more ethanol to fuel is probably not a net loss. I don't know if this is going to be a net loss, but it's got to be close. Like, it's got to be like, well, gee, thanks. Like, fuel is 20% less, but now I can go 25%, shorter distances. Like, did that really help me at all? No, I'm actually losing out. Oh, and now, now my engine is all kinds of jacked up because of the increased ethanol. So I don't know, but I would think that when you factor in the energy needs to make ethanol in the first place, it comes out to be not really a good idea. Either way, I think the only result that's going to come of this is more inefficient gasoline, people having to refuel a lot more often, and potentially serious engine problems. Mark my words, I guarantee you that there will be a headline in a few months from some mainstream media outlet to the effect of ethanol-enriched gasoline causing problems for certain kinds of internal combustion engines. And that the regime is going to come back. They're going to be happy to explain this away with their classic tagline. What are they going to say? Say it with me. Just buy an electric car, right? It's almost like a concert at this moment because you know exactly what note's coming next. So, meanwhile, the regime quietly renews oil permits for federal lands just because they know how much they're messing up. I just thought it was kind of interesting that the solution for fuel problems is to increase ethanol in fuel and not, I don't know, maybe increase domestic production or renew some oil leases would be nice. Oh, well, they're quietly doing that too because they realized how much they messed up. So very interesting stuff. I don't really know if there's much more to add on that. So let's move to significant governmental actions. So I'm going to move through this one pretty quick because a lot of this is either conjecture, unverified, or I really honestly don't know what to think about it just yet. But I thought it's interesting, so I thought I'd mention a lot of this stuff. First up is the Secret Service spy network. That's what I'm calling it because that's sure as hell what it seems like to me. Not really much is known about this at the moment, but it seems like two guys were able to pose as DHS agents, and they were able to befriend, bribe, and kind of weasel their way into the personal lives of a lot of Secret Service agents, including Secret Service agents who are on either the Vice President's protection detail or Jill Biden's presidential Secret Service detail. Depending on what news source you read, it's really hard to figure out what's going on here. Either way, there's some shady stuff going on. And me being me, with the experience I have, I looked at this, I saw that somebody sent me this story, and I thought, okay, probably some spy network or something. Really, that's usually what it is. People trying to infiltrate. Now, it's pretty bold to go around, impersonating federal agents. It's a lot easier to either bribe or blackmail existing agents. So I'm not really sure what's going on here. These days in the world, this isn't like, an episode of The Americans, right? It's not necessarily all about nation-state espionage. Corporate espionage is huge. And, geez, you might have private companies out there in other countries trying to infiltrate government assets over here in the U.S. and vice versa, for monetary reasons, right? It might not necessarily be some kind of nation-state level spying. Who knows, though? I think it's kind of interesting, so I thought I'd mention it. Up next is the Whitmer kidnapping plot and entrapment case. You can read more about this if you haven't already, but basically what we have been talking about with the Michigan governor kidnapping scandal was basically confirmed by the verdicts, in that this case was basically a case of the FBI getting a lot of goobers together and trying to get them to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Classic entrapment case, at least is what the court is indicating by their judgments on this. Again, the FBI is more concerned with trying to get some, idiots together to kidnap a governor than trying to protect us against any kind of terrorism. So, pretty standard operating procedure at this point. Just wanted to throw it out there for anybody who wants to read more about it, that we have, the final verdicts now, and basically the case is closed at this point. Up next is the poison pill, the infamous laptop, right? Hunter Biden's laptop, basically being confirmed to be real. So it's something that is a huge rabbit hole if you want to go down. I think it's interesting, but I have not had the time to go through the hundreds of documents that have come out regarding the laptop and documents supposedly found on it. The latest news is that one of the IT guys that actually worked on the laptop was able to recover 450 gigabytes of deleted data, and he has reportedly fled to Switzerland, fearing that he's going to be assassinated. I do want to mention, though, that I don't know if this is how accurate this is, but one of the original IT guys made a statement on it stating that the laptop only had a hard drive that was capable of 256 gigabytes. So he didn't want to rule out that the information on that 450 gigabytes was not genuine. He just wanted to stress that could have come from cloud data or something like that. But the original hard drive was only 256 gigabytes. So there are a lot of copies out there of the hard drive allegedly floating around on the internet. Again, we'll probably come back to this if something interesting comes out about it. And as time goes on, I'll kind of be interested in seeing what's on that laptop, as would pretty much everyone. But again, the evidence is pretty damning so far with regards to emails that have come out regarding the laptop. So keep an eye on that, and we'll come back to that when we've got more information on it. But number 4 is probably the one that we've gotten the most questions about over the past couple weeks, and that is the ATF shenanigans yet again. I hate to burst everybody's bubble on this one, but I'm really not going to get into the weeds with this too much. Other people, far more well-versed people in the 2A community and in the gun community, have talked a lot about what this new series of tyranny from the ATF means, what Biden's actions mean, and all that, and what's in the text. I don't know what it means. I know I should care. I know I really should care a lot about this, but I'm really struggling to be personally motivated to care really about what the ATF has done lately. It's like every month they come out and they do something that most gun owners are not going to follow anyway. So I don't know. I think that it's a smart idea to figure out what is going on and what kind of angles they're going after. But again, like I told you months ago, they're going to come after 80% kits. Like, that's just a fact. Like, when we saw that, we got this hint when they raided all those companies that were selling the 80% frames with the jigs and like parts kits and the slide and everything like that, slides and barrels and parts kits and things like that. When they raided those companies, we saw the writing on the wall. Like, anybody who did not see the next step was just to outright ban 80% kits, like, what did you think was next? So, I don't know. It's important to keep track of the tyranny and what routes they're going to go down, but they're trying to outlaw as much as they possibly can. And I personally saw 80% kits as being a huge target by the ATF and the federal government. So it makes sense that they would go after those at this time or eventually. How effective is this going to be? I don't know. Probably not very effective, though. Probably about as effective as every other thing the federal government has tried to do with regards to gun control, which is pretty much nothing. It's just, I think this is probably my personal apathy on this is probably just a reflection of where I think the rule of law is in this country at this time, which is, I think, pretty low. I think that more Americans than ever before don't really give a crap about federal gun laws anymore. Since there are inevitably federal agents watching this video, there's really not a whole lot more to add on it other than what I think is going to happen. I think that most people are going to do what they've been doing over the past year. Look at the data. They're just going to not give a crap about what the ATF is doing. Now, what does that mean for consumer sales? Yeah, people are going to snatch up every polymer 80 kit that there is. They're going to snatch up every 80% receiver, every jig kit. It's going to be gone because market demand is how that works. But as far as what this means, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't think that most people will care. But when it comes to what the ATF is going to do, I have no idea. So let me stop rambling on about 80% kits and let's end with Ukraine. And unfortunately, I'm not going to talk about Ukraine today. And there's a few reasons for that. For one, I want to talk about Ukraine in a more educational sense. There are so many things I want to do when it comes to Ukraine, and I've got volumes already of personal notes. The whole team here has volumes of personal notes on everything from the tactical lessons learned from Ukraine to different ways of changing our current military doctrine to what civilians can do. We've got all of that. We're learning an incredible amount of information from Ukraine. And we're learning just how horrifyingly bad warfare actually is. But here's the problem. Censorship. And this is something that we have been putting off talking about for a while just because it's not really relevant for most people, I guess. But here's the deal. We got this email in our inbox a while back. So did most people on YouTube who have made YouTube videos about Ukraine. And YouTube they are directly censoring us. We're not talking shadow banning or anything that's impossible to prove in a court of law. No, YouTube has given us a direct order to not say certain things. And that's my line. That's my hard no. Not going to do that. So here's what we're going to do. If we do another Ukraine brief, if we talk about Ukraine anymore, we are not going to do so on YouTube. Any Ukraine videos that we put out, we will put on other platforms. We'll put it on Patreon. We have a Utreon account now, which is an alternative to Patreon because Patreon is not so great with censorship, and Utreon is kind of the new hotness with regards to that. So we're going to put our Ukraine videos on there in addition to Odyssey as well. Now, what does that mean? It means that most of you probably won't see the videos. It means that the algorithms that YouTube does to put our Ukraine videos in front of new viewers will not happen. Now, I personally would like to take all of our content and put it on Odyssey or Utreon or something like that. I would love to do that. but that's just not possible. It's not feasible. Just take any, just as a personal experiment, take any of our videos, pick any of them you want. Take that video and look at the number of views it got on YouTube, and then go look over on Odysee and see how many views it got. And you'll see that it's a night and day difference, even though in the description of every single video we put out the Odysee link where you can watch the video, ad free. In any case, we're not in the business of farming for views here, but we also want to grow, and we want to expand our horizons, and we want to expand other people's horizons. And by putting all of our content on a smaller platform, people are not going to see it. And that's a problem, because we have so many different things that we want to do, and so we kind of have to do what most people do on YouTube, and that's play by YouTube's dumb rules. But here's the thing though, there is a line with that. And YouTube wants to shadow ban us, fine, don't care, nothing I can do about it. If I had a team of attorneys, there's no way that I could fight that in court, because you can't, because their processes are closed and proprietary. But here's the thing, again, like I mentioned, YouTube sent us a direct order as to what we can and cannot say, and that is a no-go in my book. So again, like I mentioned, if we end up talking Ukraine again in the Intel Update format, we're not going to put it on YouTube. I'm not playing anymore with regards to that. What we might end up doing is splitting a brief, whereas you have part 1 of a brief on YouTube, which is plays by YouTube censorship rules, right? And so that people know that it exists. And in the video, I will point you to part 2, which is the stuff that YouTube will not allow us to say. Hopefully we can make this work. Again, we've been super busy the past couple of weeks, and we just got this notification a few days ago. So it's been hard for the team here to kind of figure out what we're going to do about it. Because again, we are funded here by you. We're funded either by your direct support on Patreon or Utreon, and by ad revenue from YouTube. Well, we're not going to be putting a huge chunk of our funding on YouTube anymore. So we're going to be taking a significant financial loss by moving our Ukraine videos off platform. But that's what's got to happen with Ukraine. And yeah, so YouTube wants to kind of censor us in any other way. Well, we can grumble about it, but no, you're not going to give me a direct order as to what I'm going to say and not say, especially considering the nature of war and it being pretty horrible all the way around. I know a lot of you out there are probably very disappointed that we're sticking around on YouTube at all after this. But hey, look, that's just not the way the world works. I would love nothing more, again, than to put our content on some kind of other free speech platform. But let me tell you something, they'll just find a way to censor that one too. And at the same time, what's more important? Getting our ideas out to a group of 12 people or, 12 million, right? So I would rather play the game to some degree like we have in the past and be able to do some good in that regard and reach more people and do more good rather than just sitting on some random.com's page and not I don't want to become an ideological sounding chamber. And I think YouTube keeps us honest in that regard because our content goes to so many different kinds of people that ordinarily would not have sought it out. So the algorithms in that regard are good. They allow us to get fresh minds and fresh eyes on a lot of things that we wouldn't ordinarily get if we were to just post our videos, on some page like Odysee, right? So again, it's always been a fine line. Ever since we got started on YouTube, it's been a fine line of us dancing between how much do we want to self-censor and is this even right that we have to self-censor? What's the better option here? What's the more honorable thing to do? Well, I can tell you with regards to this, I'm telling you our hard line is this. YouTube is not going to tell us what we can and cannot do on a topic. So again, like I mentioned, when we come back around to Ukraine, it's not going to be on YouTube. So just giving everybody warning on that. But yeah, I think I've talked that one to death. So let's go ahead and close. Thank you again, everyone, for all of your support over the past, since we've been in existence, really. There are a lot of good people out there that have helped us a lot along the way, and in ways that, again, like I mentioned, you can't possibly know. So for that, we will never forget the support that you guys have given us, and we really, really, really appreciate it. There is no way that we would have been able to continue this without your support. I personally would have rolled up the S2 Underground project, shut it down, and never produced another thing last year had it not been for your support, because it wasn't a viable option for helping people. But it is now, and we are planning to expand quite significantly over the next few months. We're going to be doing a lot of different kinds of things. Believe it or not, we don't just make videos on YouTube. We do other things as well, and we're going to start releasing some of the projects we've been working on over the next few months. Hopefully, if we can get some of the kinks worked out in our systems. So, again, stay tuned. I know I keep saying that, but good things are coming. We've got a lot of things that I think will be very helpful, very handy to have, and that's going to be a huge priority for us moving forward. So we're going to continue the update briefs. We're going to continue as much as we can. We're going to fight censorship on YouTube as best we can. And if there's a way that we cannot avoid censorship on YouTube, well, we're going to take that content off platform and just kind of deal with the financial loss, I guess, in some way. But in any case, we're going to continue moving forward as best we can. And we would encourage you to do so as well. Times are tough right now, and they're only going to get tougher. I know I say this a lot, but it's the truth. And we really need people out there that are willing to help each other. Maybe not help us. I mean, who are we? We're just a small group of people, right, that are trying to do the best we can, mostly failing, I guess. But in any case, if you can just help somebody else, try to do that. That's a good way to move forward. Better yourself, help others where you can, and we'll make it through this. We'll do all right. I personally take great solace in knowing that we don't live through easy times. We're living through some pretty challenging stuff, and the challenges that we're being faced with today are kind of like they're kind of like T-ball for the game ahead, right? So we're getting our practice sessions in with regards to a lot of different things, so that when the future gets a little bit tougher, we're able to make it through it just fine. So I think that's probably a good way of looking at things, and that's what I would encourage you guys to do as well. And here are the sources for today's brief. Thanks again, everyone, for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.